Hello, my name is Reverend Lisle Gwynn Garrity. I am the founder and creative director of A Sanctified Art, which is a ministry I'll be sharing more about today in this presentation. I'm also a mom to a 1-year-old, and I live in Black Mountain, North Carolina, tucked right into the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. I live here with my husband, our daughter, our 2 very wiggly dogs, and our 6 very loud chickens. I frequently call myself a pastorist, 1, because the best titles are made up, and 2, because my vocation invites me to be both an artist and a pastor and to explore the intersections of those identities. I'm also a creative entrepreneur, which is an identity I didn't always feel comfortable claiming because I don't have any of the traditional credentials of a business person. I don't have an MBA. I haven't taken an econ class since high school. I don't have any formal training in accounting or marketing or project management. However, in the past 8 years of running a creative business, I have learned that formal training is not a prerequisite for being a successful artist or organizational leader or business owner. Formal training, of course, is helpful, but it should never be a barrier to someone pursuing the vision they feel called to create. And so today we're going to talk a lot about changing the narrative, the internal narratives that you tell yourself, as well as breaking free from cultural, societal stories as you discern or perhaps reinvent a business model. A Sanctified Art is a collective of artists, writers, pastors, musicians, and together we create multimedia resources for ministry. We currently serve around 5,000 congregations a year, which is really amazing. And those churches represent a wide variety of denominations, such as Presbyterian, Disciples of Christ, UCC, Episcopalian, Lutheran, Methodist, Baptist, and many, many others. Our creative resources are primarily designed for liturgical seasons, so we provide resources to clergy and ministry leaders, and they implement the materials in their own settings. Ultimately, the core of what we do is we use art and creativity as tools for spiritual formation. Our greatest hope is to provide spiritual nourishment for church leaders and the communities that they serve. So I'm going to start by sharing glimpses of what we do and who we are. Then I'm going to backtrack and share how we got started, how we've built a sustainable business model over time. Then I'm going to leave you with some takeaways on changing the narrative. I hope that sharing our story will help you imagine new possibilities for whatever you are discerning. Currently, our primary focus is on creating resources for the big liturgical seasons of Advent and Lent. For each of those seasons, we craft a theme, an overarching theme with weekly sub-themes inspired by our focal scriptures. And from there, we create all kinds of multimedia resources inspired by those themes and texts. So this is a glimpse of sort of the flow and format for our forthcoming Advent series, which is what we're working on right now around the theme, How Does a Weary World Rejoice? That series is rooted in the Gospel of Luke and how Luke tells the story of Christ's birth. This is a series that'll be for 7 weeks, starting on the first Sunday of Advent all the way through Baptism of our Lord Sunday. For each series, we release a large bundle of resources that we hope provide comprehensive and creative materials for a church to use in worship, adult education, children's ministry, faith formation, and any other offerings for the season. A big part of our mission is to support, equip, and inspire pastoral leaders. And we do this by providing a wellspring of content, visuals, liturgies, poems, practical tools, so that pastors can focus their time and energy on the work of pastoring, on doing what they do best. And we create all of our resources following our standards of practice. We use expansive language for God and for God's people. We create imaginative images for God and God's people. To the best of our ability, we create materials with honesty and authenticity, and we also adhere to the values of anti-oppression and anti-racism. So I'm just going to scroll through a few of the resources we create: liturgies for worship, sermon planning guides, poems and poetry, children's curriculum, visual art. As I mentioned, a big part of our mission is to create expansive and imaginative images inspired by scripture and theological themes. For each season, we create devotional booklets that include visual art and reflections, poems, original hymns, journaling, and reflection prompts. We also create other types of devotional materials like devotional cards with prompts and prayers, or coloring materials for the whole family. And we also create banner designs to help churches adorn their sanctuary with theologically rooted art and design. We are currently a creative core team of 5, and each of us on the creative team have different gifts and roles in our collaboration together. Some of us are painters, some are writers, some focus on graphic design. And since I'm talking about business models today, I'll be a bit transparent about our staffing structure. I am full-time with the Sanctified Art and made that shift around year 3 of the business. There are 2 members who work closely with me in managing the daily operations. There are 2 members who are part-time creative contributors and work full-time in other capacities. And there are 4 of us, including myself, who are founding creative partners. And we've been together from the start, and we make executive decisions together to shape the vision and direction of the organization. In 2020, as we had grown, we had the financial resources to live out a long dream of ours, which was to expand our collaborations and invite guest contributors to partner with us and to create alongside us. So for each seasonal bundle, once we have determined our theme and our direction, we then seek out and invite guest artists, writers, and musicians to collaborate alongside us. This is just a few of some of our recent guest contributors. Expanding the circle of resource creators has allowed us to pour more wisdom, different perspectives, and talents into the materials we create. And this, for me, is currently one of the most fulfilling parts of our work. Sanctified Art began in a big way due to my very unexpected journey to seminary. After I graduated from college, I was offered a unique trial year scholarship to go to seminary to discern vocational ministry. The scholarship committee intentionally seeks out candidates who have gifts for ministry, but who are not planning to go to seminary, as a way of inviting them to try it out. All expenses paid, no strings attached for 1 year. And so I was one of those candidates. Seminary was not at all on my radar, but I didn't have any other post-grad plans taking shape otherwise. And so my mantra for that time of my life was that I would say yes if yes felt more true than saying no. And so I landed at seminary with no idea what I was doing there. It was a really difficult time of confusion and uncertainty and discernment for me. However, I decided to complete both a master's in divinity and a master's in practical theology with a special focus in arts and worship, because yes just continued to feel more true than saying no. Though I hadn't arrived with a clear sense of pastoral calling, I started to experience moments of clarity along the way. As people learned that I was an artist, I started to receive invitations to teach workshops, to live paint for worship, to lead arts retreats. And in each of those experiences, I had aha moments. Whenever I was connecting art and spirituality, creativity and faith, I felt this deep knowing within myself that I was meant to do that work. When I graduated, I desperately tried to fit myself into the box of traditional parish ministry. But every time I looked at the job description to pastor a church, my heart would sink. It felt like a betrayal of my call. And miraculously, around that same time, I started to receive inquiries about creating commissions to create banners for worship. I started to get hired to serve as an artist in resident at churches, where I would lead workshops, guiding participants through creative and collaborative art projects that connected them deeply to their faith. I live painted for worship alongside a preacher, offering that visual process as another way to experience sacred proclamation. And within a few months out from graduation, I realized that my calendar was full of projects and I didn't have time to look for a job. I needed to figure out how to make all of those different projects into a career. Now, my passion and my energy for that work was abundant. However, I felt incredibly ill-equipped to pursue anything entrepreneurial. It was never on my radar to start a business. But as I started to piece together different gigs, I realized that there were many people within my own personal network who I could reach out to for advice. And so I started taking people to coffee. Anyone in my family or in my friends' network who were working artists or who had started their own businesses, who were self-employed. And I just started taking them on coffee dates, and I would ask them questions about how they managed their time, how they paid themselves, how they figured out taxes, how they built up enough income to live. What I discovered through that process was that there are so many models for how to sustain a business. The possibilities were as varied as the colors on my paintbrush. And so there was no one way to make it all work. That gave me the freedom I needed in order to explore and experiment and pursue the model that would work for the vision I had. As I started to travel more and more, leading retreats for different churches, I realized that there was this deep longing in many faith communities for more art, more creativity, but most people just didn't know where to begin. And so I started to have a vision of offering creative resources for churches, resources that would help them integrate visual art and poetry and embodied ways to pray and worship, resources for creatively adorning sanctuaries and for faith formation at home. And as that vision was taking shape, I realized that I was having what felt like the same conversation with three women in my life. Two of them, Lauren Wright Pittman and Sarah R. Speed, were classmates of mine at seminary, and the other was my sister-in-law, Hannah Garrity. Each of them were artists in different ways, and they were all looking for opportunities to use their creative gifts in the church. And so one day, I took them to a coffee shop because apparently a lot of the genesis of this whole story took place in coffee shops. And I pitched them the vision and a business plan. And to my great surprise and delight, they all said, yes, this is what I feel called to do. From there, we started creating and experimenting. And in early 2016, we released a small bundle of resources for Pentecost and were able to recruit about 50 churches to try them out. We got feedback. We learned a lot about each other's roles and what we could offer and how to create on a deadline and all of the time and energy that goes into it. And after that, we kept going. We created resources for Advent, and we haven't stopped since. Our process, our roles, our systems, our resources, they've all shifted and grown over the years, but that is how it began, from a deep longing we saw in churches, from a deep longing we felt within ourselves. Over the years, we have grown a sustainable business model through tiered pricing for our seasonal bundles. This is a photo of our 2023 bundle for Lent, shaped around the theme Seeking. That bundle included 11 resources with several free supplements and bonus materials. Tiered pricing allows churches with larger budgets to give more and also allows smaller churches access to the materials. Additionally, all of our resources are available individually and can be ordered a la carte if the bundle price is prohibitive or too much for a church to use. And in the past few years, we've been able to devote more time and energy to also creating free resources and free materials on our blog, which allows us to serve a really wide range of communities with different budget sizes. I'll talk about this a bit more later, but what currently allows this pricing model to work is urgency and demand. The churches we serve want and need new resources every liturgical season, which creates ongoing demand. And because the seasons have a very clear start date, this creates urgency. We release new resources a few months before a liturgical season begins because pastors and leaders need them ahead of time for planning and preparation. And so we have quite a long window of time to market and generate revenue for a particular bundle. And so what we see is sales peak immediately after the resources are released. And when we offer any sort of early bird discount codes that expire, and then they peak again right before the season begins, because we always have last minute planners. For each resource bundle that we launch, we have more recently committed to giving away a portion of the revenue as part of our organization's stewardship and charitable giving. We give donations in honor of our guest contributors that we've partnered with to create those resources. And so our guest contributors recommend an organization whose mission reflects their own ministry, values, or hopes for the world. And we consider them for our practice of stewardship. In this way, our financial giving becomes an extension of our collaboration together. And so when patrons purchase art and resources from our site, their money also helps support many other organizations doing meaningful and much needed work in the world. To date, A Sanctified Art has given away over $57,000, which is incredible. And so even though we are a for-profit corporation, we believe that revenue is designed to sustain mission. And part of our mission is to use art for collective flourishing in the world. So I want to highlight a few ways that we are intentionally changing the narrative. First up, we intentionally create resources, not products. Anyone who has used our resources knows that they require commitment and planning and time in order to implement them. Our greatest hope is that when we create new resources, we are passing them off to co-creators who will bring them to life in beautiful and meaningful ways. We are not interested in adding more consumer culture mindset to our worship and faith practices. Number two, we intentionally call our customers patrons. Part of our dream is to help the church once again become a major patron of the arts. And so we intentionally call our customers patrons, even though they purchase resources instead of making donations, because we want that financial transaction to feel like you are supporting the work of creatives, because you are. We like to say that our business model is founded on a beautiful exchange. Pastors give us financial resources, and we, in turn, give them creative resources. The label of patrons also implies that we are interested in building relationships and connection with our larger community. We interact with much of our larger network in our Sanctified Art community group on Facebook, which now has over 4,000 members. This is where we can engage with the ministry leaders who implement and utilize our resources. And it's also a great place for other leaders to connect with each other and collaborate. Number three, we are done assuming that artists have to starve. There's often an assumption within faith contexts that creative gifts should be offered for free by volunteers. But as artists, we know how much time and energy, sometimes your literal blood, sweat, and tears, goes into creative work. And so we knew early on that we wanted to set higher standards for compensation. When we shifted to working with guest contributors, we wanted to offer higher rates than what might be the standard or the norm in the church world, because we believe that creative work is no different than any other type of labor. Because our resources are digital, our overhead or the cost of doing business is relatively low. And so this means that the majority of revenue goes directly into compensating creators for their time, energy, and talents, providing the funds we need to pay our creators well. Lastly, we are leaving behind the idea that being a nonprofit is the only viable structure for a faith-rooted organization. When we were just starting out at that time, my money story was that nonprofits were organizations who did good in the world, and for-profits were greedy capitalists who only cared about their bottom line. However, this binary started to unravel a bit when I felt deep down that the funding structure for a sanctified art needed to be entrepreneurial. We needed the freedom to experiment and to create without having to fundraise as a prerequisite. I was also concerned about power dynamics. I didn't want the source of our revenue to be deeply tied to other institutional powers who might have certain expectations or limitations. I knew that we needed to be nimble, that we needed to be able to respond or pivot or change if needed. And so we've broken beyond that binary to become a mission-driven business committed to giving financial resources away in order to support organizations doing meaningful work in the world. We're a business, but some may say we look like a nonprofit. So I don't know what exactly you are discerning. Maybe you are curious about starting something new. Maybe you are longing to reinvent or reimagine a structure that no longer works. Maybe you're simply interested in the ideas of social enterprise. I want to leave you with some takeaways that I hope are helpful as you consider ways that you can change the narrative. First, if you feel ill-equipped to venture into anything related to business or entrepreneurship, I get it. I completely felt that way in the beginning. But one thing that I learned is that soft skills matter more than hard skills for building a new structure. Soft skills are the gifts and the traits that you have that can be applied to many different jobs and roles. So lean on those skills, whether that's communication, leadership, someone who has a captivating vision, someone who has a really strong work ethic, whatever it is that you bring to the table, because hard skills are specific abilities that can always be learned or hired out if you need to. However, your ability to persevere, to experiment and pivot, to create and maintain a positive working environment, those are all the traits that are needed in the long term to build a sustainable organization. The second story I encourage you to leave behind is the false dichotomy that you have to either choose to be an organization that does mission and service or a business that makes money. Break the binary. Do both. Imagine our capitalist society would be so much better off if for-profit businesses thought like nonprofits and if nonprofits utilized effective business practices. There's a really great TED Talk from many years ago titled "The Way We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong" by Dan Pallotta. In it, he questions our societal biases against nonprofit charities making too much money. He says we've confused morality with frugality, which can often limit the scope and scale of the nonprofit sector, making it less effective at solving a lot of the world's problems. Similarly, we don't think twice if a for-profit business makes millions selling products, but what if they were also using revenue to try to solve problems, to try to serve the common good? These days, I prefer to think that the only real difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is how they deal with taxes. And so if you are discerning between which structure might be best for your business model, I would encourage you to focus on what funding models will be most sustainable for you to live out your mission. That may help you decide which financial structure will be the best container for your income streams. Breaking the binary allows us to imagine more possibilities for generating income. So if your funding model doesn't work, or if you think that you are locked into one particular model, I encourage you to spend some time brainstorming all the ways you can generate income and what models you could build and sustain over time. For example, if your funding model is primarily based on donations and grants, could you offer educational content through webinars or in-person events? Could you look closely at your donor base and consider what other ways you could serve them, or if there are needs that they have that you haven't served? If your funding model is primarily based on services, could you create passive income by selling digital products related to the services that you provide? Things like guides or ebooks or workbooks, all of which could be used to further the work you provide in one of your services. Could you apply for grants? Could you build a subscription model or use a platform like Patreon to create consistent income month to month? Most organizations are not sustained on one income stream. So consider how you can create instead a web of diverse streams of income, because one particular stream will fluctuate naturally with the season. So it's better to have a web to bolster you along the way. Related to the last story, if you are feeling like you can't generate enough revenue, I would encourage you to get back to basics. What is your mission? What needs are you trying to meet? What problems are you trying to solve? Most successful organizations are sustained because they have pieced together two puzzle pieces. They have found a niche audience, and they have found ways to serve and to continue to serve that niche audience by meeting their needs. So once you've figured out ongoing demand, consider how you can also create urgency. If you release something new into the world, many people will be excited and interested, but most people will need some sort of incentive that pushes them to actually invest in what you are offering. And so you can create urgency by offering time-sensitive discounts that expire, by offering exclusive bonuses, perks that are granted to customers if they purchase ahead of time or early, by doing a matching donation campaign or an event with a very specific date. So if you are meeting a particular need, you will start to discover your niche audience. And a deadline will create the urgency needed to actually incentivize sales. Lastly, I wonder if this story resonates with you. It feels too risky. I'm afraid to fail. Starting something new or recreating an organization that already exists, it requires such an incredible amount of vulnerability and courage. When I was starting out, I had a vision, but I was really terrified to actually pursue it. It was so risky and unknown, and it's incredibly vulnerable to tell someone you're starting something new, if you're starting a business, a nonprofit, a church, before you've actually built what you have in mind. It's incredibly vulnerable to describe the dream you have, especially when you don't actually know exactly how it's all going to take shape. I'll never forget, back in the early days before I started A Sanctified Art, I was having a conversation with my cousin who is an entrepreneur and had been part of building a successful online business for vegan athletes. I remember complaining to him that my vision just felt too risky and it probably wouldn't work out, and I should probably just do something more reliable, like get a full-time job doing something else, and then maybe think about pursuing my ideas in 5 or 10 years down the road. He stopped me and he said, I think you should do it. I think you should do it now. His encouragement changed everything for me. I realized I had been so paralyzed with fear that I was not giving myself permission to just go for it. And sometimes you're not going to find permission from others, so you have to be the one to give yourself that permission. So if you are dreaming up a vision that seems hazy or uncertain, or is just bursting with a million different ideas and you don't know what the direction will take, if you are compelled to take risks, to try something new, if you have a clear mission but don't know what structure will work, if you want to make a difference in the world through faith-rooted social enterprise, then I'm going to nudge you to give yourself permission to try. Because I think you should do it. I think you should do it now. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the National Benevolent Association for the invitation. I'm so grateful that organizations like you exist, and I'm really honored to be a part of this year's seminar and hope that all of you will continue to be nourished by all of the presentations and conversations taking place. Thank you.